Next, from Elmhurst College in Elmhurst, Illinois, House Speaker Michael Madigan delivers an address in which he reviews the state's current financial problems and how we got to this point. Speaker Madigan also reviews what policies the legislature recently reformed and what may come up in the spring legislative session. Speaker Madigan is introduced by former House Speaker Lee Daniels. This runs about 1 hour and 10 minutes.
What a pleasure it is to stand at the podium and introduce our next speaker. And I mean that with every positive and good sense. In describing Speaker Michael J. Madigan, Lyndon Johnson may have summarized him the best by referring to himself. He said, discussing himself, "I seldom think of politics more than 18 hours a day." So much the description applied to Speaker Madigan. Without a doubt, the most powerful and successful Illinois politician of our times. Speaker since 1983, with the exception of 2 wonderful years. Speaker Madigan not only serves a diverse caucus, but is also chairman of the Democrat Party of the state of Illinois. There are many things that can be said of Speaker Madigan, but none is more appropriate than his willingness to serve Illinois and his personal discipline and mastering of the Illinois political scene. I know I was there. When at times we said despicable things about each other in public, in private, and when the people's business needed to be done, we had a mutual respect for each other that allowed us to move forward and deal with the issues of the day. There is little question that Speaker Madigan governs with little noise or bravado. He governs through strength and conviction. In dealing with the caucus from throughout the diverse state of Illinois, Speaker Madigan understands that fear and intimidation are not the only way to accomplish a satisfactory result. Instead, bringing people together along by reason and good politics works best. This helps explain his longevity and his success in Illinois. Men make history, not the other way around, observed President Harry Truman. Indeed, Speaker Madigan has made and continues to make history. He does this, in my opinion, through his compassion and commitment to the less fortunate. He has provided assistance to several worthwhile causes and organizations that deal with our neediest population, and has supported me on many occasions when I've asked for help with causes I believe in. He is a strong supporter of the arts and education and has been a driving force behind laws to expand health care access, improve education funding, increase wages and benefits, strengthen civil rights, reduce crime, preserve the environment, strengthen the state's economy, and reform government ethics. Lest I speak too boldly or flowery, it is with a profound respect and gratitude for Speaker Madigan visiting today that I bring him to the podium. I, however, urge him to use all of his talent and ability to help resolve our state's fiscal problems. He has a plan. I know he does because he always has a plan. We at Elmhurst College salute you, Mr. Speaker, for your leadership and hold ourselves available to assist you in your days ahead. Please feel free to call upon us as a resource. Ladies and gentlemen, the Chairman of the Democratic Party of the State of Illinois, the Speaker of the Illinois House, Speaker Michael J. Madigan.
Thank you. Well, Speaker Daniels, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And Lee, I've been watching these Republican presidential debates, and I rather enjoy when all those candidates address Mr. Gingrich as Mr. Speaker. Everyone addressed him as Mr. Speaker, and I thought, gee, that's pretty nice, the way they continue on. And he's been out of the Speaker's office for a long, long time. Someone earlier today suggested that Lee Daniels is prepared to declare a candidacy for governor. And it made me think that if you listen to Lee's presentation this morning, you could easily see and understand that he really would make a very good governor for the state of Illinois. Service as the governor of the state of Illinois requires, number one, that you know the operations of state government, but especially the operations of the state budget. And that you be prepared to work with people and then make tough decisions. So service as the governor, service in Illinois government always requires people to make difficult decisions, more now than ever before, because there's a shortage of money to support all of the worthy ideas that are supported by the state of Illinois. And so, Lee, give it some thought. Okay? Give it some thought. Before I begin, let me acknowledge other people from the legislature, and they may have left because they knew I was coming on stage. Senator Dillard from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker.
Oh, very good.
Nice to have you out here, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. 3 sitting House members, Representative Belloc and Connolly and Riboletti. And I believe Riboletti is probably the local representative. And then 2 former members of the House, Representative Bob Biggins and Representative Paul Freilich. And all of these people either are serving very commendable in the House or they did, and so we thank them for their service. My remarks have been labeled as a keynote address. And I'm not certain that I'm going to give you a keynote address. What I would propose is that we discuss 5 issues which have recently been before the legislature and before state government, and then we'll just go to your questions, because I think that you'll enjoy this more if you're in a position to put your questions, and I'll do my best to answer the questions. Now, the 5 issues that I would like to discuss would be education reform, state pensions, workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, and Illinois budget making. So let's begin with education reform, and there was a very significant bill passed last spring, Senate Bill 7, which dramatically changed evaluation of teachers and the criteria that would be used in terms of hiring teachers, firing teachers, promoting teachers. So let's begin with performance as a factor in layoffs. Prior to this bill, layoffs in local school districts were decided on a seniority basis. That was it. And that was all contained in collectively bargained union contracts. Under this new legislation, Senate Bill 7, in terms of teacher performance and qualifications, primary consideration in layoffs, recalls, and teacher assignments, no longer based on seniority alone. When layoffs are required, the order of the layoff will be determined by considering qualifications, performance, evaluations, and then seniority. Performance will be a factor in determining tenure. Previously, for tenure, it was just a matter of time. Put in your years and you would get tenure. These reforms make performance the key factor in tenure and certification decisions. Teachers must receive high marks in evaluations in order to receive tenure. 2 excellent or proficient evaluations in the last 3 years of the 4-year probationary period, and an excellent or proficient evaluation in the final year of the probation. The dismissal procedures have been streamlined, and they speed up the dismissal hearing process by tightening timelines so that poorly performing teachers can be dismissed more quickly. And lastly, the legislation requires more transparency in collective bargaining. So much of what we would like to change in the selection and the retention of teachers in local school districts is covered under collective bargaining. And many times the details of collective bargaining really are not known by the public. And so this new statute provides for greater transparency in collective bargaining if a contract dispute, cannot be resolved after a certain period of time with mediation, then the terms for both parties' last best offers must be made public. A good way to understand this would be negotiations, say, in the city of Chicago. It's a huge district, well over 20,000 teachers, all subject to collective bargaining. And there have been many instances in Chicago of impasse, strikes, eventual settlements. And the idea here is that if the general public knew more about what was being proposed by the teachers, by the administration, why there would be public pressure brought to bear upon the negotiators and upon the individual teachers who are part of the bargaining unit. Those are the elements of the bill. It was widely acclaimed as a solid step forward in terms of improving the performance of school teachers all across the state. State pensions. This has been a matter of public discussion, public debate, media commentary. It's a huge cost driver for budget making for the state of Illinois. And there are multiple systems, multiple sections of the statute. For the purpose of the state of Illinois, there are 5 state pension systems. So there is SERS, which is the pension system for your normal state of Illinois employee. There is TRS, a state-created pension system for school teachers outside the city of Chicago. SURS, state-created pension system for university employees and community college teachers and employees. There's one for the legislature and there's one for the judges. And historically, the requirements and the qualification provisions in these systems were all set by statute, and they'd be all over the lot in terms of requirements. But it's fair to say that as a general rule, the retirement age, the age at which you could retire and take your pension, was generally in the area of 55 to 60. If you left earlier, there would be a penalty imposed. The new statute, which was adopted, provides that the retirement age is 67 with 10 years of service, and then a penalty if you retire at the age of 62. Next, on final average salary. Here again, a mix in terms of determining the level of compensation that you would get when you would begin to draw your pension. And it would generally talk in terms of the last 4 consecutive years within a certain number of months. Going forward, it will be based on the highest 8 consecutive years out of the last 10 years of service. Next, the automatic COLA adjustment after you start drawing your pension. And this is where you get the biggest cost driver in all of this. And so today, it's generally an automatic 3% on January 1 of a year. The new provision provides that the increases begin at the latter of the first anniversary of retirement or of age 67. Increases are equal to the lesser of 3% or 1/2 the annual increase in the CPI-U in the previous 12-month calendar. That all gets very complicated. Bottom line, going forward, the benefits in these public systems will not be as rich as they have been and as they are today. Lastly, there will be a prohibition on people drawing 2 public pensions at the same time. This is the area where you've gotten several organizations and several aspects of the media saying that what we did is not enough, because what we did was to say that what I've just recited for you applies to people who got public jobs after January 1, 2011. There was no change for anybody on a public payroll prior to January 1, 2011. All of this is going forward. And now there's an argument that we ought to go back and, concerning all public employees, people who work for the state of Illinois, people that work for local school districts, and we should say to them, whatever you've earned up until today, whatever your benefit level would be up until today, no change. But starting tomorrow, there's going to be a new deal. And it will not be as rich as the old. You may have to pay in more, benefit level may be less, maybe both. That's the conceptual proposal. It bumps up against the Illinois Constitution, which contains language which many people feel would say that you could not do that. Many people would say that the language in the Constitution is such that once the pension is vested, it cannot be reduced. This is a matter of intense legal debate, and so each side has an 80-page legal opinion. If you're interested, we'll make them available to you. Bottom line, one opinion says you can do it, another one says you cannot do it, and you'll never get a resolution until one of these issues gets up to the Illinois Supreme Court. I think a good way to understand this latest concept is to think in terms of this type of proposal at the Social Security Administration. And so what the concept says is that for people in Social Security today, up until today, no change. Tomorrow, we're going to do a new deal. It won't be as good as the old deal. So let's take that concept and let's have a national debate about that. And I think it'd be really interesting to see how the nation would feel about that idea. And one little hint would be the fact that under the current Social Security arrangement, it does happen that people drawing Social Security do not get a COLA adjustment. I think it happened for the last 2 years. I'm not sure the exact years, but I think it happened 2 years in a row where the formula was such that there was no upward adjustment. So what happened? The Congress of the United States ran a bill that said, oh, we'll give them an adjustment, upward adjustment, even though under the formula they weren't entitled to it. And my point is that if the Congress took that action, it clearly indicates that a debate nationwide about changes in the benefit level in Social Security would bring on a most heated discussion. Workers' compensation. The Illinois government has been told for years by Illinois employers that workers' compensation acts as an impediment to the success of Illinois business. That when compared with other states, like Indiana, that the Illinois workers' compensation is too generous. Senator Cullerton and I brought together the interested parties on this question. Parties such as the Illinois Manufacturers Association, the Illinois Retail Merchants Association, the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce, unions, plaintiffs' attorneys, insurance companies, and through about 5 months of difficult negotiations, we were able to craft a bill which will save Illinois employers about $700 million annually. There's a matter called utilization review. And this is where someone is being treated by a physician because of a work-related injury. And where this really is heard quite a bit is in the area of chiropractors. And so you sustain some kind of an injury on the job and being treated by a chiropractor, and the complaint is that the chiropractor wants to do too many treatments. And I see a chiropractor quite a bit, and they always say, come back again. You know, we'll do this again. Utilization review is the opportunity for the employer, the one paying the cost for the medical service, to say, okay, enough is enough. and we want to review what you're doing. We want to review the utilization of what you're doing. That was changed in the favor of the employers. And so going forward, they'll be in a better position to challenge continuing medical costs, which of course brings down the cost of doing business in the state. We found a lot of complaint about the operations of the Industrial Commission today. They call it the Workers' Compensation Commission. And so every member of the commission and about 30 arbitrators were all removed from office pursuant to the legislation, and the governor's in the process of appointing new people. We mandated in the statute that the assignment of cases at the commission and before the arbitrators would be done on a random basis to avoid situations where a relationship develops between either a commissioner or an arbitrator and an attorney practicing in this area where everybody gets to be just a little too friendly. And so that'll be changed by mandate of the statute. Unemployment insurance is an issue between Illinois employers and Illinois workers, usually represented by unions. And it's a system established many years ago to provide relief for people that are unemployed, not of their own choice, but they're on an involuntary layoff. And it's a federal state system where the state is called upon to front money, put money up front. The state's in a position to take loans from the federal government, and they're interest-free for a short time, but then after a while, they have to pay, the state has to pay interest on the loan, and the federal requirement is that the payment of the interest must come from the state's general account. So it places an incentive on the state to clean up its act on unemployment insurance, because every time we have to pay money to the feds as interest payments is not available for the other things that we do in state government. This is a system that usually runs right along with the national economy. As the economy goes down, unemployment goes up, the balance in the trust fund goes down. And we take loans from the feds, we have to pay it back. When I first became Speaker, back when Abe Lincoln was still with us down there, the first thing I did in January of 1983 was to call for a negotiation on the solvency of the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. We just did that again. And our trust fund was in trouble, like trust funds all over the country. We've structured a very good solution, again, an agreement between the employers and the unions representing the workers, and it puts our trust fund in a very good position going forward. Next, the most difficult issue before Illinois government today is Illinois budget making. So let me just spend a few minutes on some history, and Lee will remember part of this, he'll remember a lot of it. There's been complaint for a little while about the method of Illinois budget making. And the complaint has been that budget making has been done solely by the governor and the four legislative leaders. And there would be what I call a one-bill budget. So a bill is the method by which we change the law. It's the method by which we give authority to agencies to spend money. They're called appropriation bills. We consider hundreds and thousands of bills during a term. But beginning in June or July of 1991, we went to a one-bill budget. Prior to that, there would be over 50 appropriation bills. Every state agency would have a bill, an appropriation bill. And they come before the legislature and they would request authority to spend money. June of '91, Jim Edgar was the governor. His first year, he was facing a budget problem. There was a shortage of money. The legislature was controlled by the Democrats. As a courtesy, the Democrats let Republicans sponsor the appropriation bills. The governor was a Republican. We worked through the way we always had worked through, and it got to be the last day of session. And I got a call from Phil Rock, who told me something's afoot. I called upon the Republicans to call the appropriation bills, and they wouldn't call the bills. And this is the last day of regular session. The next day, why, it would be a higher vote count to pass the bills. And so the Republicans deliberately did not call the bills on the last day. They went into an overtime session, and the governor told us that it was done because he wanted to enhance his position in the negotiations, because obviously the Republicans supported his position. So there we started the one-bill budget. And for no real good reason, we just kept it up. Year after year after year, one bill, negotiations, the governor and the four leaders. And there was a lot of complaint about that, especially among individual members of the legislature. So going back to last spring, I approached Representative Tom Cross, who is the minority leader in the House today. And I suggested to him that we change the method of budget making, that we move away from the one-bill budget being negotiated by the governor and the leaders, that he and I agree on a resolution before the House which would set a cap on spending. The resolution was filed. It simply said state spending will not go above a certain number. At the time of introduction, there was a blank. The resolution was referred to the Revenue Committee. We took testimony from interested parties. There were negotiations between John Bradley, who was the chair of the Revenue Committee, and David Harris, who was the minority spokesman on that committee. There was an agreement on the number that would constitute the cap on spending for the current budget year. That having been done, since we have 5 appropriation committees in the House, Mr. Cross and I again negotiated, and we gave each one of those committees a number. We apportioned the first number into 5 parts. Each committee was told, you can spend up to this amount of money. Do not go beyond this amount of money, because if you do, I, the Speaker, will not call the bill on the floor. I suggested, and Mr. Cross readily agreed, that there ought to be collaboration between Democrats and Republicans, and that all happened. And for the first time in many years, 20 years, why, the members of the House prepared the current budget on a collaborative basis, Democrats and Republicans, living under a cap. So in the current budget, no overspending. That is why we got into some contentious issues like the level of support for social services in the state, which was finally resolved in the veto session. This does not address what people would call the structural deficit. So I'm talking about the current budget, the one we're in today. At the same time, we do owe millions of dollars to vendors, because there is a provision, as Lee explained, where many of the bills can be carried over from one fiscal year to another. So we've got huge budget problems in the state of Illinois. Why? Well, number one, there was overspending in the past, and many people engaged in the overspending. It wasn't just 1 or 2 people. It was many people. Number two, since the financial meltdown, state receipts and the state income tax and the state sales tax are down by about 25% over 2 to 3, 4 years. So there was overspending. We have debt to our pension systems. We have requirements to retire, debt taken on by the state. We have bills that haven't been paid. So it's a real struggle. It's a real struggle. Some commentators would offer easy solutions. Some commentators would say, well, raise some taxes. Well, we did that. We did that in January of 11. But they would say, raise some more. Others would say, well, cut. Well, they're well-intentioned, but there's a limit as to how far you can raise taxes. There's a limit as to how much you want to cut. Because what the government of Illinois does is to support education, elementary and secondary school districts, universities. We support the Medicaid program, which sometimes is labeled health care for poor people, and it is, but it constitutes a high level of support for hospitals all across the state, for nursing homes all across the state, for pharmacies all across the state. We support social service agencies that provide mental health, counseling. We support social service agencies that provide the same type of services to those that are developmentally disabled. And so it's easy to say cut, but when you take out the knife and you start reading through what you're going to do, not so easy to do. And that pretty much tells you why the solution is not going to be done in the short term. It's going to be done in a longer term. And we're going to have to work our way out of our problem. We've made a real good start in this current budget. First reduction budget in a long, long time. $2 billion below the governor's request. Let me say that again. What the legislature did was to come $2 billion below the request of Governor Quinn. And we'll be called upon to do the same thing starting very shortly in terms of the budget that begins July 1 of this year for the following fiscal year. So I think I've spoken long enough. I think some people are starting to droop down a little bit. And we don't want that. And I know I sure hope some of you have some questions.
Over the next year, do you foresee any further reforms to local government pensions or any cuts to the local government distributive fund?
Okay, I'm sorry. Good question. And if you've jogged my memory. Let's start with the local government distributive fund. That's a fund of receipts under the Illinois income tax that goes to local governments. The village of Elmhurst gets money from that fund. The city of Chicago gets money from that fund. It happened when the Illinois income tax was first adopted in 1969. Ogilvy was the governor. Ogilvy wanted the income tax. The first Mayor Daley was the mayor of Chicago. And first Mayor Daley was a real good negotiator. And he was prepared to put 40 votes on the bill in the House, the appropriate number in the Senate, but he said, I want 1/11th off the top. And every, listen closely, every city and village in Illinois got the benefit of that. They didn't have a darn thing to do about putting votes on the bill. Mayor Daley puts on the bill, but every city and village got that money. So ask Mayor of Elmhurst, he's here. You want to give up that money? I don't expect that the local government distributive fund would be reduced. I don't expect that. But you should understand that Illinois is a big exception to the national rule in this regard because there's many states all over the country that have reduced their level of support to local governments, cities, villages, counties, park districts, whatever it may be. Illinois is a big exception, and I just would not expect any change in that fund. Next, on pensions, we did do a negotiated bill on police and fire. And I hadn't heard that there was a request to do further changes on police and fire outside the city of Chicago. And then in terms of the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, I would not expect changes in that fund because when you open these discussions about pensions, it all relates to cost. And there's a funded ratio that people talk about. And you look at a pension system and you say, the funded ratio is whatever it is. Ideally, the funded ratio is around 90%. And these state pension systems today are somewhere 50% if they're lucky. In the case of IMRF, the last I checked, it was at 85%. So it's a well-funded pension system because the statute provides if the local governments don't make their payment into the fund, there's an automatic intercept under the statute where the state just takes the money out of their local government distributive fund or their sales tax receipts and sends it off to the Illinois Municipal Retirement System.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My name is David Halsberg. I'm the village manager in Lombard. My specific question revolves around PSEBA. Back in 1997, the state legislature passed the Public Safety Employees Benefit Act. This act was wonderful at its time and was to provide assistance to catastrophic injuries for police and firemen injured in the line of duty. However, in 2003 in Crow versus Bloomington, the Illinois Supreme Court saw differently, and they saw this as any career-ending injury. Well, let me tell you, as a municipality, in those 9 years since that legislation has passed, we have now had 9 cases, 9 PSEBA cases of individuals. These costs run in upwards of $800,000 per incident for the municipality because we're providing health benefits not only to the injured party, but to his spouse or her spouse and their children until the age of 27. This has dynamic effects on our community. We've asked for legislation really to relieve this. We've had, of those 9 officers, I can tell you that most of them are all working today. They've chosen to go back to work but continue to receive this benefit. There's really a simple fix, and that is use the language that the Social Security Administration has developed when it comes to what catastrophic injury is. When our community supported this legislation back in 1997 and our chief went to the legislature and said it was a good thing, it was a good thing, and the legislature had the right intent at that time. So my question to you is, where are you on this issue and how do we get this issue on the House floor? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm familiar with the issue. I've read about it, and I agree with you that the costs have gotten out of hand. There's somewhat of an analogy to what we did in workers' compensation, because in workers' compensation before the change, there was an award called wage loss differential. Wage loss differential. You're on a job, you're hurt, you recover, but you cannot go back to the old job. And you have to take a new job at a lesser salary. And the difference between the old job and the new job is the wage loss differential. And before the change in the statute, they take that number and work some mathematical magic, and it would go on until the person died. And so in the change that we did in workers' compensation, we provided that that you would do what you do, but you terminate it at the time of retirement or probably age 67. I'm not sure the exact age. So it's somewhat in the same neighborhood. I agree with you that it's a statute and a program that's gotten out of hand, and I'd be more than willing to address it and try and reduce the cost.
Mr. Speaker, I never thought I'd live long enough to see both of you on the stage together. This is indeed a pleasure. Mike, may I call you Mike? I'm loud in New York.
You can imagine what some people call me.
You mentioned earlier a 25% drop in sales tax revenue. My colleague from Inland earlier mentioned the internet, and I want to pose that same question to you. What is your take on what we can expect, what has transpired, and give us a hope for the future, because this means a lot of jobs for Illinois, as well as tax revenue. Thank you.
help me with your question. So are you proposing some new taxation?
No, I was hoping you would.
Well, I'm a Democrat, so.
Well, that's why we figure hope and change will work.
Are you talking about taxing internet sales?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, right. You know, which has been an issue before the legislature now for years. And I'm not certain what the end of it will be. I know that the Retail Merchants Association, which represents retailers that operate out of buildings in Illinois, would say that those sales ought to be taxed. Certainly, it would be good for the Illinois government. It would be good for local governments that impose sales taxes. It would end the competitive advantage that some people have as against others. There's all good reasons to do it. It hasn't happened because it's a tax. It's a new tax. And the way I understand it is that those transactions were not taxed because it was the beginning of the internet and it was thought, well, we ought to have an incentive to help this along. Well, it's done pretty well. And so, again, you know, I would be open to it for a whole host of reasons.
We'll send you a briefing paper on that soon, Mr. Speaker.
Short. This question relates to the non-Chicago teachers' pension. Now, you've got different classes of people there. You've got a brand new employee. You know, we tell them what they get, they accept it or not. Then you've got the employee who's presently contributing, and then the employee who's now retiring. And that now retiring person, I would say you're negotiating with them on what their benefits would be. But what I'm interested in is the already retired. They're under the 3% COLA, they're grandfathered. Is that going to remain under what you propose? It wasn't quite clear.
You've gone right to the third rail.
I don't want to do that. Leo verify that.
Yeah, no, I evaded what you want to go to. And my example would be somebody on the job, where you tell a person on the job, okay, whatever you earned, you keep up until today. Tomorrow, you guy on the job, new deal. For those already drawing the pension, huge national question, right? So let's go back to my reference to the Social Security Administration. What if that were proposed nationally, where we would say, okay, dear Social Security recipient, they're all over the country. I heard a percentage, about 20% of seniors in Illinois, is that right? Or 12%? 12%. The price of food and everything else is going to go up, but SS is going to go down. So I just, it's an open question. Obviously, it's an open question. My view is that that's the last place that people want to go on the question of cost of pensions. It's the last place they want to go. But you refreshed my memory. Let me deal with another issue, which I think is significant. Many of you have probably never heard about this, but I referenced 5 state pension systems. SERS for state workers, TRS for teachers outside of Chicago, SURS for universities and community colleges, judges, legislature. Okay? The normal arrangement in a pension plan is that the employee pays in and the employer pays in. The employer. That's the normal arrangement. So if you're an employee of Elmhurst, you pay in, the village is paying into IMRF. That's the way it usually works. That's the way it works at SERS, normal state workers. The worker pays in, the employer pays in. However, at TRS and SURS, it's different. At TRS, the employer, the local school district, pays in 0.054% of payroll. 0.054% of payroll, And prior to the middle 90s, it was zero that the employer, the local school district, paid in. At SURS, universities and community colleges, they pay in zero as the employer. So all the money that goes into TRS, SURS, is coming from the state government. And let's understand, these are people that never got a payroll check from the state of Illinois. They never looked at their paycheck and said, oh, they're in the state of Illinois. No, the paycheck came from a local school district. It came from a local community college district. It came from a university. But they're not paying in. And so when you hear complaint about the funding for the state pension systems, in the current budget, our payment is about $4 billion. $4 billion to those 5 systems. 1/2 of the $4 billion is to TRS, the Teachers Retirement System. And then add in whatever we pay for SURS. So over 1/2 obligation to pensions, which is the subject of great public debate today, is for people that never worked for the state of Illinois. And to further understand this, just go across the city boundary into the city of Chicago, where the city of Chicago school system has their own teacher retirement system. They are not part of TRS. They have their own system, and guess what? The Chicago Board of Education pays in as the employer, in addition to the school teacher in Chicago paying in. Okay? Just facts that are never, you're never going to read this in a newspaper article, you know, or one of those editorials talking about the cost of pensions. They're never going to put a paragraph in there and talk about that. So, Lee, even I don't remember why that happened. I've talked to so many people, because with me, I've been here a long time, and I knew people that were there when I first arrived. And so you can go to people, and you can say, well, why did that happen? I've never found anybody that can tell me why the state of Illinois stepped up one day and said, okay, dear school districts, we'll just pick up all your pension costs. And to further understand it, in a local school district outside of Chicago, you've got school teachers and you've got non-school teachers. So it'll be janitors, maintenance people. For the janitors and the maintenance people, the school district makes an employer payment into IMRF, Illinois Municipal Retirement System. So for some of their employees, they pay in. For the teachers, they do not. And the state of Illinois has a huge requirement to make that pension payment. Huge requirement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a privilege to have you here. I'm Scott Levin. I'm a alderman here in Elmhurst, and we local officials try to control our costs. Personnel is probably our largest cost in our budget item, and I'm relatively new on the council, and as I got involved in the financial matters of the city, when we tried to control our police and fire costs, I learned that our police and fire contributions are set by the General Assembly, and then we pay them. But the second issue, which is the one I want to address to you, is that when it comes down to negotiating with our union employees in the police and fire side, they set a number, we set a number, we go to arbitration, and it's set up that the arbitrators pick whatever number they want, not in between, but one of those two numbers. And in 2009, at a time when my own business was cutting back, people were taking cuts. If we put 0% on the table and the union put 3%, then we have arbitrators who know if they don't give them something, they're never going to be hired as that arbitrator again. It seems like a flawed system. The cost of living was negative, but we were forced to give a higher increase to our police and fire than probably was justified for the economy. And I'm posing the question, is there a fix for this on the horizon? Thank you.
I'm hesitating because I'm not certain what the fix would be, and I'm not certain that the legislature can go in and put restraints on the arbitrator. I just don't know about that. Again, this is a matter of first impression for me, so my instinct would say, well, you're an independent employer, so you're on the employer side on this, and you were created pursuant to Illinois statute. You're not part of the state of Illinois, right? What you're bound under, of course, is the collective bargaining statute. It was adopted by the legislature, and I suppose it would be possible for a bill, just a bill, that would say on public employee collective bargaining there shall be no arbitration.
Well, no arbitration, but there's a world of difference between if one side proposes 0%, the other side proposes 5%, and an arbitrator is forced to choose, they will always give something. And an arbitrator should have the flexibility to decide what a fair number is. That's the fix, I believe.
I don't have an answer for that, and I think that the professional sports teams suffer through the same thing. I mean, that's Jerry Reinsdorf has said that to me, that they don't want to go to arbitration because the ball player always wins. You have to give me some time to study that. You're back.
Hello there. I'm here to help. We're from corporate. We're here to help. We're here from Springfield. Mr. Speaker, my understanding is, for his problem, the statute provides any arbitration decision in a labor issue is appealable to the courts. So in other words, if they feel unfairly treated, they still have another option. You don't have to go to the legislature at that stage. You go to the court.
I'm with Alderman Levin on that issue. I'd like to have a little compromise in the middle, but because whenever we go to court, typically municipalities lose. But my name is PTC. I'm the mayor of the city of Elmhurst, and Mr. Speaker, I thank you for coming out today. Thursday morning, I woke up to a TV that had the picture of my grandfather on the TV, and I was like, wow, my grandfather's on TV, because Hull House, which is where my grandfather was raised, closed. And you know, when we see our state almost dead last in social services, dead last in education funding, you know, we have to do more with less, and we're doing that in local government every day. You know, we're at City Hall, we had 5 counters, we've got them down to 3, and we've reduced head count, almost 15 people. But we're still delivering, because bottom line is that's what we have to do in government, is deliver and make sure we provide for our people. My question to you is, with limited money, with limited resources, knowing that there are out there for how we treat people with human services and social services, and knowing that we have to invest in this, because ultimately if we don't, the costs are magnified even more. We are one of the leaders in institutional care for people with disabilities, which is about $180,000 a person, but also very union driven because it holds a lot of jobs. We know that community-based living, like folks at Ray Graham who are here today, the former CEO of Ray Graham, and Kathy Terrell is here, costs about $60,000 a person, much more humane. They live in our community, they're integrated. And we also know that in-home care is around $20,000 a year. There are waivers that often are overseen with federal dollars that are matched from state dollars to federal dollars. The autism waiver, for one, has not seen additional dollars, which is where we can take care of our kids in their home. So my question to you is, with all of these limited funds, are we willing to change the ways that we do business? Thank you.
Wait, who does business? I missed the last 5 words.
Oh. The way the state does business. In other words, are we going to change our ways in how we care for people? Because we can do more with less, and I think do more in a humane way with community-based services versus institutional-based services.
I think you know that's underway, and the trend is in that direction. So one of the big issues before the legislature in the veto session and now relates to closing of facilities. The governor's announced 2 closures, and the governor claims there will be more as we go forward. So the answer to your question is yes. I'm not sure of the percentage breakdown, but I know there's many, many people in the legislature that would prefer community-based treatment as opposed to institutional settings. That's just the case.
Do you see us coming up with a capital bill, a new capital bill this session?
Good question. I would be for more capital spending. As usual, the question is where do you get the money to pay for it? We did a capital bill 2 to 3 to 4 years ago, and the estimates that we used in that bill have not come true because part of the estimate was video poker, another part of it was improvement in collections in the lottery system. Video poker hasn't started at all. We did change the lottery system, and our expectation is there'll be additional money from that. Bottom line, we won't have enough money to do everything that we said we would do in the bill. I'd be in favor of putting more money into capital, which is our construction program. Question is, where do you find the money to put it in there?
Will there be a casino bill, you think? I mean, we read reports about people negotiating on a casino bill with the mayor of Chicago. What's your opinion?
The negotiations are endless. A casino bill is a very difficult bill because it's gambling and because there's so much money on the table. And so the interested parties would be current casinos, racetracks, City of Chicago that wants a casino, people called the horsemen that raise horses, and they're usually lined up with the racetracks, but not always. And there's a lot of difficult negotiation that goes on among those people because there's a lot of money involved in this. Both Mayor Emanuel and Mayor Daley have views as to how the statute should be structured for a Chicago casino. You can understand why they would have these views as the mayor of the city. Be real simple about it, why you'd have a two-tier system. You'd have the existing casinos, and then you'd have a different arrangement for the Chicago casino because it would be owned by the government. Real tough issue, and I don't know what the end of it will be. I just don't know.
Harry?
Hi, welcome to DuPage County. Again, my name is Harry Theodore. I'm with Addison. I don't remember if Lee told me you're younger than you look or you're older than you look, but you look great. You look great. My question is regarding the teacher evaluations. And I think that's terrific. It was so difficult to try to move some of these teachers around. I'm an ex-teacher from Chicago, so when you do the evaluations, who does the evaluation, and is there an opportunity for that person to correct his mistakes?
Yes. Yeah, the answer to number 2 is clearly yes, and the answer to number 1 would be the usual suspects, and so the principal or the superintendent will be involved, and there'll be people appointed by the administration. Plenty of opportunity to correct, plenty of opportunity to appeal, plenty of due process, but just clearly an improvement over the old statute.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, Illinois has the lowest bond rating now. We have the biggest backlog of unpaid bills, the biggest unfunded pension liability. What is it going to take to turn that around in the state of Illinois? What is the plan so that we're not last on all of those categories?
As I said earlier, it's not going to be a short-term solution. It's going to be a longer-term solution. A good start was the current balanced budget, currently not spending money that we do not have. A next good step would be to do that again under even more difficult circumstances than existed last spring. And so if we can condition the budget makers in Springfield to live within our means long-term, not just for 1 year, why we'll be taking some significant steps for restoring fiscal solvency to the state of Illinois, but it's not going to be done in a hurry.
Comment, if you would. I think you first started serving with Governor Ogilvy. Back in the...
I thought it was Abe Lincoln.
Comment, if you would, the governors you've served with and your kind of general comments about them, including our current governor.
Richard Ogilvie was the governor when I started. He was there for 2 years, and then Governor Walker, followed by Governor Thompson, Governor Edgar, Governor Ryan, Governor Blagojevich, and Quinn. Okay, I suppose you want me to comment on how it is to work with them? It's a good discussion. I was just a young person under Ogilvie, and so I maybe met him once. I really didn't work closely with Governor Ogilvie, but I did work with Governor Thompson. And Governor Thompson is a very intelligent person, quick learner, very flexible, understood that he was involved in government, where everybody's entitled to their due, and that you need to fashion compromise if you wish to move forward. He was followed by Governor Edgar, who was a little more strident than Governor Thompson. Jim Edgar was and is a student of government. Thompson had another career. You know, he was a lawyer. He was the U.S. prosecutor in Chicago. Edgar was involved in government, I think, for all of his life. And he made himself a student of government. And so he'd be far more interested in heavy discussion about government policy, government operations. He'd be far more willing to engage in protracted negotiations in order to get what he wanted, especially on a budget, which is exactly what he did in 1991. Governor Ryan, very flexible, very interested in just identifying problems and fashioning solutions. And one of Governor Ryan's favorite approaches and favorite statements would be to convene the leaders. Lee and I would be in the room, and the other leaders, and George would just say, well, look, we've got problem A. What do we have to do to solve this problem? He'd say, Mike, what do we have to do? Lee, what do we have to do? That's what he was like. And of course, in these situations, why Lee or Mike they might want to evade the question. You know, they might have their strategic plan that they're working where they don't want to answer today. And George would just persist, you know, and I want an answer. And there was one, I think you had to be, when George Ryan wanted to do a capital program, right? And he called us together, and he went around the room, and he said, I want this capital program. There were going to be fee increases, tax increases. And I think he started with me, and I told him, I said, I'm for it. I think you ought to make it bigger. And I don't know what Lee said, but he got to Pate Phillip, and there's a favorite method in the legislature with a legislative leader. So there's a question like that, and the leader doesn't want to just look at a governor and tell him no. They don't want to do that. So they blame their caucus members. You know, they would say, our caucus won't agree to that, okay? And that's what Pate did. He said, oh, Governor, you know, and Pate used to refer to his caucus members as guerrillas. He'd say, my guerrillas don't like that. And so there's this pause. And Ryan just looked at him, and he said, you said that to me after everything I've done for you. And then he took him out of the room. Took him into a separate room, closed the door. There was a lot of screaming and shouting. And they both came back and sat down, and George looked at Pate, and Pate said, well, Governor, there'll be enough votes to pass your bill. That was George's method. Very effective. Then we went to Blagojevich, and that was just confrontation from beginning to end. So his method was confrontation, publicly and privately. And I became a target of his confrontation. And so in terms of working with Blagojevich, it was difficult from the beginning until the very end. And the idea that there would be sound policy decision, that didn't exist. That wasn't in the cards. With Blagojevich, he had a he had a different agenda that all related to what he was going to do later in life, that type of stuff. Quinn is the governor today, very well-intentioned. You may remember he was a gadfly. You may remember that. Maybe you don't. But he was the guy that would schedule Sunday afternoon press conferences. And in those days, the media would actually go to his press conferences. And so now he's in a position where he's governing. And so we've been able to work through our problems and our differences, and we have plenty of differences, even among the Democrats. It's better than it was, I'll tell you that. So that's pretty much the way it was, the way it is.
If I might, last question. We have several provider groups here today, and following up on the mayor's question and observations about funding, from Ray Graham to Haymarket Center to St. Coletta's to Beth Shan Organization, Union Christian School, all of these organizations have very noble causes, as you know, and you've supported all of them over the years. But now they're facing very difficult and dire circumstances. Their credit is difficult to get a line of credit from a bank. The banks are closing them down. They're finding themselves unable to borrow money to pay their bills because the state of Illinois is not meeting its obligations. What advice do you have for them as we look to the future, and what hope do we have?
My advice to everyone is to do what Lee has done on behalf of several of those people, which is strong advocacy. Number two, bear with us. So I think that if you have listened to me today, as I've given my remarks, I'm just telling you the way it is in Springfield today on budget making. I'm not sugarcoating anything. I'm just telling you the way it is, how we did it, how we're going to do it again this year. And so strong advocacy, for all of you, easy to do. Number two, bear with us. We've got a serious problem in terms of receipts. It all relates to the national economy. There has been some improvement in the economy, but I don't think it's going to be quick and easily sustained. I think that in terms of the national economy, a full recovery is well down the road. And Lee, you've reminded me, here's another way to understand what we're grappling with in Springfield. So when you do budget making, the first question always is, how much new money, how much increase in receipts from last year to this year? They call it new money. And then you proceed to spend the new money. So 4 or 5 months ago, we were getting some pretty favorable reports that the new money would be over $1 billion. And that's good in terms of budget making. Well, what happened is, talked about those 5 state pension systems and our obligation to pay to those pension systems. The numerical requirement put upon us is done through a formula, calculations, and the pension systems just file the certification and thereby establish a number that we're expected to meet. Well, what they filed for the pension systems was an increase of $1 billion. So the increase we were looking at, it's all going over to the pension systems, which is why there's such serious discussion about changes in those pension systems.
Well, how could we properly thank you for coming out and spending time with us?
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.